Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Horror Corner. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Hirsch, and this week we're doing another movie review. This is The Curse of the Werewolf. Released in 1961 from Hammer Films. Directed by Terence Fisher. And I have it as part of this Hammer Collectors series. So, The Curse of the Werewolf is actually Hammer's one and only full-blown werewolf movie, which is kind of strange. You'd think they would have done some more. So the film is directed by Terence Fisher, who is just a staple of Hammer films. He directed so many awesome Hammer movies. Another fun fact is this is the first werewolf movie that was ever shot in color. So the film stars Oliver Reed in the role of Leon Corleto, Catherine Feller in the role of Christina Fernando, Yvonne Romaine as the servant girl, who was also mute, Anthony Dawson in the role of the Marquis Sinestro, and Desmond Llewellyn, believe it or not, makes an appearance, who played Q in all the James Bond films. But he's actually not credited in the role, which is kind of strange, because it's a little bit more than a cameo. I mean, he has like a small role, you know. But anyway, it's just cool to see him in a Hammer movie, you know. Classic British actor, you know. So the film is set in 18th century Spain. Although you never really see anyone with a Spanish accent, they're all like British. Because it's a Hammer movie, of course. So what happens in the film is we meet this beggar on the street at the beginning. And he notices around town that there's some kind of, like the bells are ringing as if church was in session, but it's not a Sunday, so he's like, what's going on? And he finds out there's some kind of big shindig going on in town with these rich aristocrats. Like, they're throwing a big, huge wedding. And he thought, well, that might be a good place to get some money, you know. So he does. He goes begging at this big, huge, like, castle where they're throwing, like, a big ceremony, you know, celebrating the wedding of the Marquis. And the beggar comes in, and Desmond Llewellyn answers the door, and he's like, shh, we don't want anyone to see you. But then they say, who is that? And they bring him in, you know, and they just, like, clown around and make fun of him. And there's a whole crowd of people laughing at this poor beggar, you know. They give him wine and stuff, and they make him dance and sing and act ridiculous, you know, and it's really humiliating. And then what do? They throw him in prison. Like, nice. This guy's a scumbag. So yeah, the Marquis has him thrown in prison, and they just leave him there to rot. And this one young girl, like, feeds him, this beautiful young girl, you know, drop dead gorgeous, you know. And she serves him his food, you know, and he kind of takes a liking to her, you know. I mean, who wouldn't? She's just gorgeous, you know. Classic Hammer beauty. And, you know, he kind of smiles at her, and she kind of, like, responds a little bit. She kind of smiles back at him. Apparently the girl is mute, too. Like, she never talks for some reason. And, yeah, as the film goes on, he gets more and more, like, savage, because nobody remembers who he is, that he just sits there and rots in prison for years and years and years. Before you know it, he's like hairy, he's like a savage, like man beast, just like chomping on bone and stuff. And what happens is the young beautiful servant girl, the Marquis sends for her and has her taken to his room, and by then he's like old and crusty. He looks just like Ebenezer Scrooge. And he kind of like tries to get touchy-feely with her, and she's not having any of that, you know. She like smacks him and storms out, and then they throw her in the jail with the crazy savage dude. And it's not good, you know. The guy smiles at her again, and she's kind of like trying to cover up, and he rapes her. He rapes her. Really messed up, kind of, you know. It's like, wow, I don't think I've seen anything like that in a Hammer film before, you know. It's pretty intense stuff. And it's hard to watch, you know. And what happens is she ends up getting away somehow. She ends up getting away, but she runs off into the woods, and she just kind of collapses, and she ends up in the river, and some guy finds her, and, you know, they adopt her, basically. They save her life, you know. They have her in the bed, keeping warm, and they feed her, and they're like strange that she's mute, you know. She kind of tries to talk a few times, but she can't really talk. And it turns out she's pregnant, and like, oh, we just adopted this girl basically, and now she's pregnant, and they end up raising the child, you know. And the child is young Leon, of course. And we find out that around town, animals are being savagely ripped apart, and they're like, ooh, there must be some kind of beast walking around like a wolf or something, you know, tearing these animals apart, like the deers, and, you know. And they're like, whoa, we gotta catch this wolf, you know. But guess who it turns out to be? Young Leon. And at one point, the father, the adopted father, sees him, and he's got, like, fangs and stuff, and he's, like, frothing at the mouth, you know, trying to get out, you know. And, of course, Leon grows up. He's got the curse of the werewolf. And picks off people one by one, you know. I will say, though, the film definitely lags in the middle section. It definitely really slows down, and might be hard for viewers to be able to tolerate how slow it is. Definitely a big slow burn in the middle section, but you get an awesome payoff with the final act, you know, once Leon fully reveals himself and they show the werewolf, and he looks badass. And he's got, like, silver hair, which I love, because that's like a real wolf, you know. And that makes him different from, say, the Wolfman from back in the 30s and 40s there. I really like the creature design of the werewolf, you know. And Oliver Reed gives a fantastic performance. He's really conflicted. And whenever the full moon comes, you see him, like, sweating and he's shaking, you know. He does manage to fall in love with this young woman, Christina Fernando, but she just doesn't have a clue what he really is, you know. But when the townsfolk find out, you know, they grab their torches and their pitchforks, and, you know, and we see the wolf, like, running away, hiding on the rooftops, and really cool stuff. I love it, you know. And we see him at the bell tower of the church, you know, hanging on the bells, and awesome stuff. Really cool, like, final act where we, unfortunately it takes such a long time to get to see the werewolf, you know. Some people might not be able to tolerate that, you know, where he really doesn't fully show up until the last act, but the film is definitely a slow burn to get to that grand finale. But I think once you get there, it's definitely a great payoff and a great direction by Terence Fisher. There is some kind of weird score in there, though. Like, especially during some scenes which are kind of romantic between Leon and Christina, and we got this wild, sweeping, epic, romantic music going on in the background. It's like, it's a little much for a horror film, but at other times when the horror scenes come about, you get a really cool score. But Yeah, definitely worth a watch. Definitely worth checking out Hammer's one and only werewolf film. So definitely check out The Curse of the Werewolf. I give it 2 devil horns up, and thank you for joining me, Sean Patrick Urshan, in the Horror Corner. Tune in and stay scared.